We cannot come in as an occupying force and make a community safe. We have to do it with the assistance of the community. One of the best tools and skills a police officer has is being able to communicate with people and to get people to comply.
Well, that's interim Seattle Police Chief Sue Rahr talking to me more than a decade ago about her Guardians, Not Warriors approach to policing, which at the time she was promoting as head of the state's Criminal Justice Training Commission, which oversees Washington's police academy. Can she push this message through in Seattle, among other initiatives, as interim chief? Plus, did the Seattle City Council get it right on the size of the transportation levy? A big vote on that this week. Plus, there's a new report from the city auditor on how and where Seattle should deploy its resources for drug overdoses and criminal activity. Well, we're not on summer vacation, but there's still plenty to unpack this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I am back with my host, David Croman. And David, I saw you post about this. There's something about a week-long break, a week-long vacation that just doesn't cut it. Just as about you're settled in to relax, it's time to go back to work. Some thoughts about this, sir?
Yeah, well, that was just my experience last week because I was off and felt like right around the time I was, truly settling into vacation life. And it was time to come back to work. But
yeah,
it was a nice week.
Loving it. Yeah, loving every minute of it. Right. Well, David, thank you for joining me once again. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They're on the first floor of City Hall. And a special thanks to the patrons who keep this show going. Joseph just got on board last week. Many thanks, Joseph. A special Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal is heading your way, sir. And that's just one of many cool perks for our patrons. You get the Patrons First podcast before anyone else, like last week's discussion with Chief Amy Smith, head of the care department. So become a patron. We will even answer your questions on the show. How about that? Find the podcast on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of this podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. All right, let's do this, folks. It is time for Right Here, Right Now. All right, well, David, at long last, the Seattle City Council voted this week to finalize the transportation levy we've been talking about on the podcast here for about the past month or so. It's $1.55 billion, largest levy in city history. The median homeowner out there in Seattle can expect to pay $18.58 more per month for this starting next year. And David, we've talked a lot about this. The sidewalks, Councilmember Saka wants to invest in. He's the Transportation Committee chair. There's some bridge infrastructure money, too, a lot more. But I was really struck by the clamor of voices on both sides here. You've got Councilmember Morales on the council pushing for an even larger levy to keep chipping away at a big backlog of projects. And then you have former Councilmember Alex Peterson saying this is way too big, needs to go back to the drawing board. A quick take on Peterson. He's been calling everybody in town, me included, local chambers of commerce too. Is this the first transportation levy for Seattle in a while that's actually going to have some formal opposition? What do you make of the former council members' pushback on this?
Well, I was going to say it actually is the first transportation levy that's, I think, doesn't really have any formal opposition. And I think Alex Peterson knows that and understands that. And so I think he's maybe kind of stepping into that role a little bit.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the thing, though, is the last opposition to Move Seattle levy was funded by Faye Garneau, a kind of a very wealthy businesswoman who spent over $300,000 of her own money pushing back.
She's since passed away. Yeah,
she's since passed away. So she is not obviously, there is nobody who has taken her place financially. So it appears that Peterson is going to be kind of the most vocal opponent on this. But unless he has something that I don't know about, I don't think he has Faye Garneau levels of money to spend against this. So, maybe though he kind of acts as a seed for some other opposition to kind of form around him. So maybe it attracts other people to start speaking out against it. Peterson, when he was on council, with months to go, really pushed hard for this kind of developer impact fee, which he was arguing would be a replacement kind of funding source for more property taxes.
Right. So it didn't potentially lower the transportation levy amount. I gotcha.
Right. Didn't end up going anywhere. And, this new council, I don't remember on the campaign trail them being asked too much about kind of their thoughts on large property tax levies. I suppose I'm a little surprised at their eagerness and willingness to go bigger on this stuff. I thought maybe there would be a little more kind of hesitancy, but in fact, no. they've gone the other way, which is
They went bigger than the mayor's package, right? Yeah.
right. They've grown this. You never know about polling on initiatives, but I think this basically takes it right to the edge of where their polling shows support might start to drop if they go any bigger than that. So
Right.
it's not even really about fiscal responsibility that they're not going any further. I think it's more just the polling tells them they might be treading into more cautious territory if they were to go bigger than this. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it pretty much sailed through this council without a lot of opposition. No one pushed that hard to make it smaller. And so I think Alex Peterson is noting that his voice that was on council is not being filled. He did choose not to run again.
Importantly so, yes. Good point.
So it's, to an extent, he is the one who left that void on the council. Who knows if he would have run again? But, he had the opportunity to bid for this job again and be that voice, and he chose not to take it for legitimate and fair reasons, and I'm not questioning that. But
sure,
there is a little bit of an interesting dynamic there to have a council member who was in power just 7 months ago and
was transportation chair. Right?
And was transportation chair. So he could have been the one controlling this at the time and opted out. And so now he's, we've seen this from a few council members now. I'm thinking also of Sham Sawant, which is you realize fairly quickly that your power of shouting from the sidelines is significantly less than it was when you were actually on the council.
Very true. And this is something the council, I know, really is trying to get right, because this is a levy that makes up 30% of the budget for the Seattle Department of Transportation. So definitely something I'm going to be keeping an eye on, and I know you will here too, David. I wanted to talk about some other levy-related news. Oh, the great segues we have on this podcast here. The council made some changes to housing levy spending late last week. Council members say they're focused on preventing homelessness. Also, they have a special focus on helping those recovering from substance use disorder. They're also trying to increase transparency in reporting the results of this levy. That really seems to be a theme with this council, trying to report out performance metrics, which is not to say other councils weren't working on the same issue. But at any rate, David, when you look at the impacts of this housing levy, roughly 2,800 units built with the last levy, close to 3,100 hoped for with this new levy. I'm just trying to figure out how this equals progress, because I'm looking at the math here. Let's say we look at the most recent point in time count for people who are homeless in Seattle and King County, which is over 16,000. What impact is this housing levy really going to have? I keep coming back to this question.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly going to have an impact for the 3,100 families or individuals who move into this housing, and that's not to be understated. But the fact that this levy is 3 times the size of the one before it and will buy, I don't know what the exact math is, but, basically 20% more housing or something.
Yeah, right.
So, 300% increase in dollars, 20% increase in production, that doesn't exactly align. I think that is just the reality of the affordable housing business right now. I mean, we've talked about this before. We saw it in this year's award for new housing, which is that it was smaller than it has been in past years, despite this levy having been passed. And a lot of that is because the Office of Housing is needing to spend its money to shore up the projects that it had already funded.
Right.
Which, I'm sure they're not happy about, but it becomes this kind of wonky thing where these projects have gone up in cost because of interest rates. There's some challenge, at least so what I've heard from affordable housing providers, there has been some challenge of leasing up or at least collecting rent on enough units to switch from your construction loan to your kind of more long-term loan. And so these affordable housing buildings are getting caught on construction loans, which are much more expensive than the kind of long-term loan that they would like to be on. And so just the cost of a lot of these projects that we thought were kind of in our rearview mirror has gone up. And so what we're seeing is this housing levy is going towards shoring up projects that were funded by the previous housing levy. And, and then there are a bunch of other factors as well, but the end result is $1 billion suddenly doesn't go nearly as far as towards creating new housing as some had hoped, perhaps.
Yeah, and I wanted to go quickly down a path with you here, David. The council this week approving a measure to help convert existing office space into housing. We've been tracking this for a while, finally came to a vote. And this is really another tough issue to unpack for me, because this is expensive work to transform office space into housing. It might yield somewhere between 1 to 2,000 units, I guess, over the next 7 years here. And additionally, this was big for me, to entice developers, they will be exempt from the city's mandatory housing affordability requirements. So, and I know this is something we've touched on before here, David, too. Any thoughts on what effect this new legislation is going to have on the city when it comes to housing?
I think it's unclear what effect it'll have. These are really complicated projects. I mean, as one developer said, any building can be converted to housing. There is a path forward to that. It's just a lot of times it seems the cost of doing so is actually more than it would be to just build a new building because, if you imagine a big office space, you've got thousands of square feet that are like in the center of the building and not anywhere near windows.
Right,
the windows don't open, the HVAC system and the bathrooms are not set up for apartments. So these are really massive projects. So this legislation, one developer said that it would probably save him $1 million on a possible conversion project. So it's not nothing. And when you're talking about pretty thin margins, $1 million could make the difference. Well, and on the MHA, mandatory housing affordability piece, there's some logic to that too, because if you remember when that was passed, that was part of this bargain where basically if you're a developer, you get extra space in exchange for being required to fund some affordable housing. Well, if you're converting an existing building from office space to housing, you can't take advantage of that extra space because the building is already built. And so the grand bargain kind of falls apart. And I think that was the thought for exempting them from that.
Got it.
At the end of the day, though, I don't know. Maybe this makes the difference in a few projects. I think the reality of office conversion is still is super complicated and unclear.
Thank you for breaking that down, and a big thanks to Heidi for putting together that piece in the Seattle Times. All right, well, up next, a report on drug overdoses, crime numbers, and more coming into the Seattle City Council from the city auditor this week. What do these numbers tell us, and what's the next move for the city on this data? We're going to break it down on Now Hear This. The City Council's Governance Committee will take a look at a new report from the City Auditor this week that was commissioned by former Council President Deborah Juarez and Mayor Harrell, asking for a study of places where drug overdoses and crime are concentrated. So this is in Sarah Nelson's committee, the current council president, and she says this is a report the council really needs to respond to.
Its formal and common sense recommendations provide a roadmap for change that I think that we all hear from our constituents is very much needed. There's crime, there's addiction and drugs and the drug crisis, and then the two together. And this audit does talk about the importance of taking a place-based approach and mapping the two phenomena so that we can best deploy our limited resources.
Council President Nelson also put out a press release about this week, a bit of a rarity for her. And David, there is a ton to unpack here in this 67-page report, but I did want to get to a root issue here. So when we talk about drug overdoses and crime, there's a balance here that Seattle's been working on. Someone addicted to drugs is not necessarily a criminal. They need treatment. Everyone agrees to that. But when you see in this report that 10 continuous street segments, so areas of about 2 to 3 blocks, had more than 100 crimes against persons and overdose incidents combined, what does that say to you, David?
But there's a lot wrapped up in particularly fentanyl. As we know, it's a more intense high than heroin. It doesn't last as long.
Sure.
Some people who are addicted need 16,
pills
20
a day, right?
hits a day. Mm-hmm. And so it really kind of fuels this cycle of needing to kind of fund the habit. There is a lot of crossover, between the folks who are in those areas and homelessness, perhaps. So it's not like we're talking about people with a lot of disposable income, and so it seems like there's some correlation between that and the need to some people shoplift to fund their habit or whatever it might be. Sure. I don't know that this is surprising. If you've been down to these areas, there's a lot of disorder, and if the retailers down there are to be believed, there's a lot of shoplifting present, and police are fairly consistent presence in these neighborhoods. So it's a big thorny issue that kind of how the Venn diagram exactly plays out. But the fact of these being both areas that have a lot of drug use and substance use issues and also some crime, I'm not sure that is all that surprising to anyone who's spent any time around there.
I suppose not. I hear what you're saying there. And sometimes these people who are overdosing are the victims of crime themselves in terms of these.
I think often, yeah.
Yeah.
Often it is. Yes, exactly.
There's some nuance to it, but I definitely hear what you're saying. And I think this might be a report that a lot of people in Seattle would say, no, duh. But I did want to talk about some of the recommendations of the report. And there's a ton of them. I'm going to try to focus on two of them. One is the auditor says the city needs to focus on a hotspot approach to crimes, which it has definitely done before. So I'm definitely wondering about that. And the city also needs to have a project champion, the auditor says. That's the phrase used here, to oversee this effort. David, just some thoughts on these recommendations when it comes to hotspots, when it comes to having a champion for this. Is there anything new here, I guess? Are we going to see something new come out of this that the city has not tried before? How do you look at this?
Yeah, I mean, hotspots,
We've been talking about that a while. Yeah.
Right. I haven't been around. I've basically been a reporter for a decade or whatever. And I remember hotspots from basically day one. And I'm sure they precede that as well. They tend to kind of come and go when there's a new mayor. There's usually an area of focus around particularly 3rd Avenue. There's the shooting right before the pandemic. There was a hotspot push. And shortly after Mayor Harrell took over, there was a big hotspot push. And you can tell a difference fairly quickly when these things happen. It's just the ability to sustain that is questionable. I have memories of 3rd Avenue, a couple of years ago being like basically pretty empty and
yes,
thinking, wow, okay, this is looks quite a bit different. If you go down there now, it's back to kind of what I remember it being. There's quite a few people around, the McDonald's there and some boarded up buildings. So hotspot, certainly not new. It's not like the police department has a lot of disposable staff right now.
They are going to be bringing in some federal dollars, I think, to help out. Maybe work with some other regional partners. It sounds like here, so maybe that's a bit of a tweak.
Right. Yeah. There you go. And then what was the other piece you mentioned? Just as far as coordination.
The champion, project champion. Who wants
project champion? Yeah. I think when you talk about, say, public safety advisors in the mayor's office, a lot of times that is kind of what they're doing, is thinking about 3rd Avenue. Perhaps it would be helpful to name a specific person, the 3rd Avenue czar or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
I think the reality of what the work looks like is probably closer to something like what LEAD does or some of these outreach programs, which is slow, plodding work. It's not quick. It is not silver bullet. It's just making contact with people over and over and over again until you can establish some kind of rapport with them and get them what they need so that they're no longer spending time down there or no longer. People forget sometimes that LEAD is, at the end of the day, a crime prevention and public safety program. It's, it does that in a way that doesn't involve handcuffs or firearms. But, Lisa Dugard will tell you, we are a public safety program. We're just going about it in a way that we think is more sustainable than like hotspot policing, for example. And so, but again, it's slow and it's plodding and it's really difficult. And that is a little harder to convey, I suppose, in a couple sentence recommendation.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm really interested to see how the council replies to this, because I know that crime and responding to it was a big reason why a lot of these council members were elected. Now they have some data they're going to work with, and we'll see what that plan will be. But I did want to talk about briefly with you, David, a few ballot measures. First up, the statewide initiative 2066 that would allow voters to weigh in this November on the state's plan to phase out natural gas use. A few weeks ago, it really didn't look like this was going to fly, but organizers say they now have more than 430,000 signatures and got those in the span of just 49 days. So here we are. I guess I was looking at this, David. The measure built up really quickly, has more than $2.2 million in its campaign coffers now, according to the Washington State Standard. What do you make of the quick turnaround of viability for this measure?
Yeah, I mean, it shows me that there's some issues that fire people up quite a bit. And, as we've talked about before, I think this slate of initiatives is fairly well targeted to hot button issues that they're politically smart. They kind of understand what riles people up, and so
and this isn't connected directly to Let's Go Washington, but it could be. I know they're talking to that campaign.
Yeah, there are some people. I think the overlap in support is probably fairly great. And so, the gas, it feels like we haven't heard as much about sort of the gas stove debate. It had a moment there when there was some proposed rule examining natural gas at the federal level that was quickly spun into, they're trying to take away your gas stoves.
Yes, right.
It was never really that. But I do think that there is some salience to issues around, what the government says you are allowed to do in your own home that has found a vein that at least among the base of people is rich.
Yeah.
Whether or not how well it translates to the broader public, I don't know. But again, there are a lot of, I think what these initiatives collectively are trying to do is give voters a reason to come out and vote for pretty emotional issues that they feel like they can relate to directly. And then I would anticipate that their hope is that will then have some kind of down ballot and broader effects on, say, the governor's race or congressional race or legislative races.
Yeah, we shall see. And in other voting news, it also appears that Seattle I-137 will be heading to the ballot. This is the social housing funding measure we've discussed on the podcast. The Urbanist reported this. House Our Neighbors, the group behind this bill, brought in 38,000 signatures, about 12,000 more than what they need to get this on the ballot. And just to follow up on this, David, you've got a number of sitting council members who say they're not big fans of new taxes, although we have talked about these levies here. Even if these taxes are on bigger companies, as this measure considers here, do you get the feeling the council wants to move quickly on this and put this on the November ballot or push it towards February? Any thoughts on that?
They're running out of time here to do stuff. They have to take it up here pretty quickly, and I haven't seen it come up on any agendas yet.
Not yet.
I think if they, someone will have to correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think that if they don't take a vote on it before the primary, then it goes to the February ballot.
Yeah, the primary in August.
The primary in August. So I think they would have to act before. Basically, I think they have about a month or so to act. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen any indication that they will, which would make me guess it ends up on the February ballot.
Yeah.
Of course, the backers of this want it to be on the November ballot because they're anticipating much higher turnout and maybe more progressive turnout.
But the social housing measure did pass in February ballot for whatever that's worth. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Though the first measure didn't have any formal opposition. There wasn't really anybody fighting it. Now that there's money at stake, there is going to be formal opposition. The chamber, I think in particular, is going to probably run quite a few ads pushing back on this. So question will be, can it succeed on a February ballot while also facing fairly well-funded opposition?
That is going to be the big question indeed. Thank you very much for that, David. All right, well, coming up, what's the biggest job ahead for Seattle's interim police chief, Sue Rahr? David talked about that question and more with the chief recently. We're going to get some insights coming up on what's next. David, you had an interview recently with interim Seattle Police Chief Sue Rahr in the Seattle Times talking about her role. The headline was "Move in, clean up, and move on." I was really interested to read that when Deputy Mayor Tim Burgess called her to ask about the job, she wasn't really jumping up and down eager about taking it. It's maybe because SPD's got a lot cooking right now. You've got staff misconduct. You've got 911 response times that aren't in good shape. You've got criminal investigations of assistant chiefs, even allegations of gender discrimination against former chief Adrian Diaz. Why did she end up taking the job, do you think? And did you get a feel for her top priorities coming into this?
I think she took the job because I think in jobs like police chief, you could probably point to, CEO or other kind of big leadership positions. I do think that there's appeal to an extent to step into a job when things are not going well, because then, we've kind of at rock bottom. No one's going to blame you for it being there. And then you have the opportunity to, really shape a new direction. And this is somebody who spent a lot of time in policing. It's been a while since she's actually led a department.
Yeah.
And so, she felt like, hey, I'm talking the talk. I should try and walk the walk here.
Yeah.
As far as, what she can actually do, I think at the end of the day, her task is to make the Seattle Police Department look appealing to somebody else.
Yeah, right.
Which is get it to a place where a sane and qualified person will want to be the permanent chief long term. Mm-hmm. And so I think in her estimation, that means calming down the kind of interfights that are happening particularly between leadership and higher rank in the police department. Show that the chief can have a relationship with City Hall that is not overly oppositional, and maybe kind of stabilize the staffing situation enough she's not going to grow the police department by any sort of significant amount, I'm sure, but stabilize it enough that whoever is coming in feels like they are in a good position where they can start pushing the ball forward rather than just sort of stopping the bleeding.
Right. And it was really interesting. I talked with Chief Amy Smith of the Care Department last week. She's like, I want Sue to stay around as long as she can. So, I mean, she's eager to see how this is going to unfold over the next several months. And we don't know just yet in terms of that search for a permanent chief, how that's going. But we're certainly going to keep tabs on it. And I thought you asked a really good question in this piece. Who is she setting the table for? Can any permanent chief realistically walk this line between the public and its concerns about the SPD? You got City Hall and its political pull, and then the police unions and their power dynamic. Is that possible to find that person?
Yeah, it's interesting because, she kept talking about how, I'm going to be good at this job because I don't care if I'm fired, which is probably true. But then it raises the kind of inverse question of, does that mean anyone who is kind of concerned about their job security going to be bad at this job? She said, I think the person exists out there that can have bold leadership or vision and pursue it relentlessly and so on and so forth. But it does raise an interesting point, which is the police chief is in some ways the most political job in the city, I would say, even though it's not elected, of course.
Yeah.
But you are serving at the pleasure of the mayor, but the people that you're serving at the pleasure of the mayor and the public, but then you are also the boss and need the buy-in of the police unions and the rank and file. And as we know quite well, those two things, sometimes those things are all very oppositional. And so you have to, as a police chief, be able to kind of live in this limbo state between all of these different parties and somehow kind of manage. I mean, I think it's why we don't see police chiefs last that long, honestly, because there's mayoral turnover and changes in, just look at how different things feel now than they do in 2020. Just, you never know how the winds of change will shift and so on and so forth. And so I think there's a reason why these chiefs don't stick around all that long. But I think her argument about being good at the job because she's unafraid of being fired does get a sort of essential point of the difficulty of this job for anyone who will be confirmed by the city council.
Yeah, it's a really interesting process. And I know she didn't really want to bite on, do you find an internal candidate or an external candidate? Did you get any vibe on that?
I would be shocked if it's an internal candidate. Truly shocked, because she didn't say explicitly, but she did say she has not met anyone in the Seattle Police Department yet who is ready for taking on the job. And she said, I think whoever takes this job should have experience in leadership, and that just doesn't really exist in the police department yet. Harrell has said, he would not discourage anyone internally from applying, but we know that in the last hiring round, when Carmen Best was hired, we know that Tim Burgess wanted to hire somebody from the outside, and I just think there's too many kind of grudges that clearly are being held in the police department, and too much baggage to bring somebody in from the inside. And I think if they hire somebody internally, it's going to be a thing. We'll just say that much.
That would be a big story for sure. Well, it is time to wrap up, David, and I noticed a recent post that you had about your approach to our suddenly warm weather. You had a barbecue at your place recently, and since then you've just been refilling the same cooler with drinks and ice. And I know it's the season of drinking outside. Definitely like doing that. Do you try to stretch this into October, or what's your plan? What do you got?
Yeah, as long as it's warm out, it's really fun to just have a cooler outside at all times. You're just outside and you grab a drink, and anyone walks up and you just offer them a drink. It's great.
I like it. I like the approach, man. That's the kind of way I try to make my way through the summer too. But thank you very much, David, for joining me. As always, thanks to everybody listening to this episode of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks especially to patrons who support the show. If you want to be a patron, find us on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen. Thanks for watching on Converge Media too. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.